All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Gearset's webinar on release management for higher education. We're about to get started now. This will be recorded and put up on our YouTube channel afterwards, so don't worry about if you missed this live. So let's get started by a quick introduction to what we're going to talk about on the webinar today. We're going to start with a brief introduction to Gearset. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what the app is, we'll run through what you can do with it. And we'll then move into a bit of an overview of higher education on the Salesforce platform and how it can help higher education institutes work more effectively with their end users and their students. And then we'll go into a little bit of a dive into some of the challenges into release management on the platform, and then back that up with a real-world example where we'll jump into more detail into one of our customers in the higher education sector who has those challenges around release management and how they then tackled them, and how they used Gearset to build a more reliable and faster release process. And then we'll jump into an example with Gearset so you can see that end-to-end flow for yourselves, and then a quick summary and any questions at the end. Before we go any further though, we'll just do some quick introductions as to who's on the webinar today. So my name is Jason, I'm part of the customer success team at Gearset, and I've also got my colleague Alice with me.
Hi, my name's Alice and I'm part of the content marketing team here at Gearset. So we'll just start off with telling you a bit about what Gearset is and what we do. So first and foremost, Gearset is a tool designed to make release management on the Salesforce platform ingeniously simple. So with really easy metadata and data deployments, full integration with Salesforce DX, and a suite of powerful automation features, Gearset is designed to enable really simple release management for even complicated Salesforce environments. So I'm just going to go through really quickly some of our key features for you. Firstly, Gearset is built on quick and easy comparisons, so you'll be able to compare any two sources of metadata. This means you can compare any two Salesforce orgs or compare to your source control repos with our native version control support. You'll be able to quickly view the differences between your environments and perform fast, granular deployments. And you can do this by simply selecting individual components that you'd like to deploy. When you're configuring your deployment, we have automatic advanced problem analysis, as well as static code analysis. And this will catch any issues with your code and identify any problems with your deployments before you deploy, ensuring that you can deploy much more successfully. So on top of this, we've got a bunch of powerful automation features. So this includes continuous integration, change monitoring and org snapshots, deployment rollback, and unit testing. This means that you can forget about those slow manual tasks. And all of this can be performed in just a few clicks. So you don't have to worry about manual XML editing or package creation. Gearset will do it all for you. So with Salesforce and higher education, Salesforce has specifically designed solutions and a tailored CRM built specifically for the needs of colleges and universities. This has meant that higher education institutions have been able to implement and fully utilize Salesforce to drive campus and student connectivity. But obviously, within higher education, the end customer is often a student or an academic rather than a business person. So implementing effective release management is key to delivering these high quality features directly into the hands of students, helping to deepen these relationships and drive that success. But as with any release management, it can be difficult to adopt the most efficient process for managing your different Salesforce environments and delivering these maximum potential benefits to your student community. So obviously, we all know that release management can be a little bit tricky. The first-party tooling is often limited, and when you have multiple people or teams working in the same orgs, keeping track of exactly what is being changed in your different environments and keeping track of every single change that is being made and avoiding overwriting other people's work can become increasingly complicated and time-consuming. So this is where companies start to seek the help of third-party tools to help boost and start streamlining their release management process. But even when leveraging third-party tools, it can be really difficult to know what release management best practice even looks like, especially when you add version control into the mix. It can be really tricky to know how best to implement a Git workflow into your existing release process. Obviously, every company's release management situation is a bit different, and their accompanying challenges will tend to differ slightly. But I'm just going to hand over to Jason. He can take you through one of our real-world examples.
So as Alice has said there are a lot of great benefits to working in Salesforce, and it delivers a lot of value to your end users, whether that's students or business side of things. But there are some challenges in working in release management on the platform. So what we're going to do now is dive into a little bit more detail into a real world example of one of our customers who are a university in the US. and have a look at the challenges they were running into in terms of release management on the platform, and then how they used Gearset to address those. So what they were looking to do was build a new student information system on a second production environment in Salesforce, so they could then deliver greater engagement with their end users on the campus. And they also wanted to move for a slightly more mature DevOps process. So they were initially working, as most companies do, with change sets and changes made directly in their environments. They had a medium-sized team of developers internally and some admins, as well as an external group of contractors who are helping them with some of this work. And although this process works well to begin with, making changes directly in orgs is quite quick, and you can get those changes promoted out to those end users nice and quickly. The challenge is that you end up introducing errors, and it can be easy to step on each other's toes when you have multiple developers working in the same environment. And you can see one of the quotes there. The first one is that they saw lots of changes where things were broken. So people would deploy fields and forget to deploy the permissions with them, and then the end users wouldn't actually be able to access them. And those sorts of challenges are very common when you're working in a sandbox-driven development flow. They also had a specific challenge with external contractors, and there was challenges with their internal teams and their external teams having a lack of visibility into what changes were being made across each environment and who was responsible for pushing those out. And finally, they relied, as a lot of companies do, on manual change tracking spreadsheets. So with change sets and working directly in orgs, it's very difficult to actually keep track of what changes have been pushed and what needs to include in each release. And the problem with those documents is that they easily get out of date, people forget to add changes, and then you end up overwriting things, or deployments get derailed because you haven't got exactly what you were expecting. So they started looking for a better way to run their release management and came across Gearset. And one of the first benefits that this university really saw was the visibility they got. So Gearset gives you, as Ellis said, that diff between different environments. So you can see at line-by-line XML level what changes have been made. But what they also had a lot of benefit from one of our other features, which is our change monitoring. And that takes snapshots of orgs on a daily basis and tracks changes between them. And that gave their development manager a really nice insight into what was going on across these environments and across these different teams. And once you've got that baseline, you can then start building out a slightly more complex process once you know the state of play. There's then a slightly more in-depth quote here, which I'll run through in a little bit of detail, but I think it's useful to see exactly what process they ended up moving towards. So by adopting Gearset, they managed to introduce source control using Git into their development flow. And with the advent of things like Salesforce DX and the recent pushes to source-driven development, you really need a tool which supports source control natively and allows your teams to work in whichever way suits them, but supporting that underlying principle. So the process they ended up with was their developers working in their IDEs and some of them working in their orgs, and then committing changes into Git using Gearset. Now they work in, they say here, feature branches. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, a feature branch in Git is simply a local copy of your Salesforce environment, essentially, which you can work in where you don't get changes from anybody else. So you can work in isolation, and then when you're ready to, you can merge those releases into master to deploy them out to your production environment. They then have Gearset using to push those changes into those Git branches. They open a pull request, which allows them to merge those changes out to master, and then finally they'd use Gearset to push those changes into their production environment to get the releases into those end users' hands. So Gearset helped them not only with the process of actually building those deployments, so we'd collate the packages for them, we'd deploy them out and then release them, but we also help a lot with the reporting and the tracking afterwards. So you get full deployment reports, you can share those with their team, and they use that to increase that visibility into what was going on across those different teams to reduce the reliance on those change tracking documents, but also to reduce the chance of stepping on each other's toes. One of the other really interesting areas they looked at was hotfixes. So everyone wants to have this perfect release flow where changes are made in feature branches, pushed into Git and then out to your environments, and it always goes that way. But there will be cases where you have a critical fix or some change you really need to get into the hands of your users. And in that case, sometimes those changes just get made directly in environments. And it's important that they had a way of tracking those changes and then bringing them back down into their normal development process so they didn't get overwritten. And that was another way that Gearset really helped them, was through the change monitoring, they could track those hotfixes automatically. and then they could very easily push them into release branches and back down into Git, so the developers automatically track those changes as they worked. We then spoke with them after they'd had a couple of months to use Gearset and get this process set up, and you can see they had a lot of benefits from adopting this new process. So one of the key ones for their development manager was that they managed to move from this org-driven development into version control-driven development without having a big overhead on the rest of their team. So one of the big challenges of moving to a new process can be the barrier to entry of learning a new way of working. But they found that with Gearset, they could really easily switch across without making that difficult. And that meant that the team adopted it, and that meant that the process actually stuck. And as you can see from the middle quote there, they did an evaluation of all the tools on the market, including the first-party ones from Salesforce. And they really found that Gearset was the only tool they could use which allowed them to reach that DevOps process and really deliver the value to the end users much more quickly. And then you got a nice quote at the end there with the manager saying, obviously, it's easy to justify the decision to use a tool if you're the one who has to actually deal with the fallout when you do things wrong. So this is obviously just one specific example of how a university who uses Gearset approach their challenges and how they then solve them with the app. But it's something that's replicated in many different places around the world. So we've got a little map here which just shows a few of the states in the US where we have a presence at higher education institutes. So we believe we've got 10 at the moment states represented in the United States. We also have a number of other universities and higher education institutes around the world, in England and in France and Germany, using the app. So although every university is different and the challenges your team face will be different depending on the size of your environment, Gearset is a really flexible tool, and it's already got a lot of traction in this sector. And we think that there's a lot more room for us to help other universities and then higher education institutes really move to a more modern process and really deliver that value to users more quickly. But what we've been through so far is all very theoretical. It's quite difficult to actually imagine what that looks like in your environment when you see it just from a few quotes and a few slides. So what we're going to do now is actually have a quick run through of what that process looks like in the app in Gearset, so you can start to visualize what that might look like in terms of changing your ways of working if you moved across to using the app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a quick example where I've got a org here that I'm working on some changes on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a simple new field to my account object. And then what I'm going to do is use Gearset to deploy that change into a branch in my Git repository. And then I'll be able to track that change in the app and see that committed. And then we can go through the process of actually setting up a continuous integration job so that every time I do a new piece of work in this environment, that automatically gets deployed into my target. This obviously will be a process that will vary depending on your specific needs, but it should hopefully give you a bit of an overview of what this actually looks like in reality. So I'm starting out in my developer environment here, and what I'm going to do is simply create a new custom field on my account objects. This is obviously a very simple representation of the kind of work that you'll be doing to help your end users and your students get value, but it's a nice simple one we can push out for the demo. So I'm going to call this field higher education. I'm just going to click next. I'm going to leave these profile settings fairly standard. I'm just going to go through and save this new field. So we've now added this new account field into this environment. And what we want to do is commit this along with a few other changes into a feature branch in Git using Gearset. So if I jump to another tab here, I have a repository set up, my JSON's repo, and you can see at the moment there is currently one branch, which is master. So the first thing I want to do is actually create that new feature branch that I can work in so I don't step on anyone else's toes when I deploy these changes. So moving into Gearset, I'm on the compare and deploy screen here, and this is where all your comparisons start. So you start by running a comparison between any two environments, between source control or between orgs, see the differences, and then from there you build up your deployment package to get those two in sync. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose source control as my target, and you can see I've got JSON's repo selected here and I'm in master. But what I want to do is actually create a new feature branch to push these changes into. So I'm going to call this higher ed and create the branch. It's now going to create that branch for me straight from within the app, so I don't have to bounce out to a different workflow to do this. For my source, for my comparison, I'm going to choose my developer environment. So this is the one that we just made that change in and adding the field. And if I quickly just jump across back to Git and I jump back to the repository, you can now see I've got two branches. So we've created that second branch to the app, and that's now being reflected in my version control system. I'm now going to run a comparison between my developer environment here and this new branch in my repository. And what we're going to see is the results where you'll see a few new fields that I've added, including that higher education one that we saw just now, along with the permissions for them and a few other changes that I've been working on as part of this project. So we've got a couple of changes to some record types and a couple of the components as well. And this is one of the real places where you get value from a tool such as Gearset over the first-party tools such as ChangeSets or the Force.com migration tool, is that we give you that visual diff into what's changed between your environments. So you don't have to rely on what's going on in an Excel spreadsheet. You don't have to rely on people remembering to tell you the change they made. You can run these comparisons and you'll get that line-by-line view so you can very quickly see what the state of play is. So I got the results of my comparison here. What I'm going to do is jump to new items in my results. And you can see here we've got a few custom fields and their permissions that have been created in my developer environment but don't exist yet in my repository. And you can see the one we've got here, the one we just added, this higher ed field. So if I select that, I can actually see all the metadata information here in the lower half of the screen. And associated with this field, I actually have the permissions for it. So if I select this component here, I can see for each of my profiles here, these field level security settings, which obviously allow those end users to actually have that read or write access to this new field. Now, if you're using something like ChangeSets, you may have to do these manually, or you may have to push this as part of a larger profile change. But with Gearset, if I want to commit just this field and its permissions, it's really easy for me to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the field, and I'm going to select its permissions. I'm going to leave these other components for now, because let's say I'm working on these and I want to push these into a separate commit into my repository. So I've got my custom field selected and my permissions, and I'm going to hit next. Gearset will then run a very quick check for your metadata to look for any dependencies or other potential issues with your deployment. So one of the really interesting things we do is Gearset really understands your metadata. It doesn't just treat it as flat XML. It actually understands the relationships and the hierarchy between those different objects. And we can help suggest changes you might need to make to your package before you actually deploy to Salesforce to make it more likely to work. And it's one of the key reasons that not only deployment, but continuous integration and automation with Gearset is really much more reliable than you'll get with any other tool. What I get here is my pre-deployment summary. So I have the new field and the permissions we're going to deploy. And on the right-hand side here, I'm going to add a quick note saying, add new field to accounts. Now this summary deployment note here is stored in the deployment history in the app, so you can track what change was pushed. And in this case, because we're pushing into a Git repository, this actually becomes my commit message within the repository itself. There's a few other options you can do here, such as downloading the package, exporting this to Excel, but I'm just going to go straight to deploy for now to keep this nice and simple and hit deploy. What Gearset's now doing is it's stitching together all that XML and it's building the deployment package and it's going to push it into this branch in my repository. So this kicks off that whole deployment process. If you're pushing to an org, you may want to be running some tests at this point to confirm that your Apex is all confirming and meeting your 75% code coverage requirement. But in this case, just as a simple field that's going to be pushed into my repository nice and quickly. What we'll see when that completes is a deployment summary, which then shows me the components that we've pushed and some information about that. And that'll be available as a PDF report that I can download at any point, so I have a really complete audit trail. So you can see here that change is now being deployed. I've got some information about this deployment. If I want that is reports stored as a PDF that I can send to other people, I can just download that from the app here. And that's also automatically stored in my deployment history as well. So you can see this is a really nice way of sharing this with your team. You can set up custom email notifications and things like that as well if you have other people you want to notify. If I jump back into my repository now, I can see my higher education's new branch. And if I jump into the commits, you can see this new one of add new field to account is tracked to my repository. So that's all been done in Git, and I haven't had to go into GitHub here at all to do any of that process. So that gives you an overview of what it's like to work with Gearset to push a change from an org into a repository, and that's really the basis of any source-driven development process. If you want to go one step further, you can set up automation jobs in the app to continuously push those changes into staging environments for faster testing. So what we're going to do now is very quickly run through creating a continuous integration job in Gearset, just so you can see how easy and quick that is. So within the app, I'm now going to go to my CI jobs tab. You can see I've got a couple of continuous integration jobs that I have set up before. What we're going to do is we're going to click Add New Job. And what you have here is a few options for how you want to configure this job. So I'm going to first of all give it a name, and I'm going to call it Higher Ed, very inspiringly named. And then just like for comparison, you choose the source and target. So in this case, the source of my deployment is actually going to be my GitHub repository because I want to have this automatically push changes I commit into this branch out to my Sandbox for testing. So I'm going to choose my JSON's repo repository. I'm going to choose this higher education branch. The target is then going to be a staging sandbox in Salesforce, so I can quickly test that any changes I'm making are easily going to pass tests and not cause any issues. I'm then going to set this job to run when the source branch is updated. So this means that the job will automatically be kicked off as soon as we commit changes into this higher education branch. You've got a few other configuration options here in your CI jobs around setting test levels, the types of changes you want to deploy, and custom metadata filters if you really want to specify exactly what metadata to push. But I'm just going to leave this all in its default configuration for now. The other thing you can do with these jobs is set up custom notifications. So let's say, for example, I want the whole team at Gearset to be notified when this job runs so that they know exactly what's going on with my deployments and I can see that testing in action. You obviously have other ways you can set notifications with text, Slack integration, Teams, and of course, Chatter. Now that I'm happy with all this, I'm going to click Save. And what Gearset's going to do is give me a few bits of information that I need to set up my webhook in GitHub so I can then link this job to that commit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump from my repository into the Settings tab. Now this process will vary a little bit depending on the source control system you use. This is GitHub, but the process is very similar for Bitbucket or GitLab or any other provider as well. I'm going to go to Webhooks and I'm going to click Add Webhook. What I've got to do now is enter in my payload URL. So that's given to me here in the app. I'm going to copy that and I will paste that in. And then I'm going to check my content type to JSON. And I'm going to grab my shared secrets and I'm going to paste that in. And then I'm going to leave these settings on their defaults, make sure the webhook is active, and click Add. So that webhook has now been set up. You can see that's ready in the app. And that's really all you need to do in GitHub to finish that configuration. I can now click Finished in Gearset, and you see this CI job has been set up and is waiting to run its first deployment. If you want to see then what that process actually looks like to trigger that CI, I'm then going to run another quick comparison, just as we did before, between my developer environment and my repository. And what we're going to do is we're going to push another one of those custom fields. And what that will do is automatically trigger that deployment from CI to push that change then out into a staging sandbox. So this will give you an overview of really a quite advanced end-to-end ALM flow, where as soon as you check a change into your source control system, it then gets tested in the sandbox. And this is something that really, it can seem quite complicated and quite a long way away when you're working directly in orgs or if you're working with chain sets. But actually, if you have a tool which makes this really easy, like Gearset, it doesn't have to be a complicated process. It really is a matter of minutes to set up these jobs. Your teams can work in whichever way they like. All the history will be tracked through the app, and you can really start getting the benefit of faster, quicker, more frequent deployments than you would with working directly in orgs. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to select another field and its permissions to deploy to the app. I'm going to hit Next. And then we run through the same process as before, where we'll see those components. We'll add in a little commit message, and then we'll trigger that deployment off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another deployment note to this. I'm going to say add second field, and I'm just going to deploy this right away. So this deployment is going to kick off now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open another tab in Gearset just so you can see that CI job automatically kick off as soon as this deployment completes. So this should complete in just 1 second. I'll get the same deployment notification as before, and again, this will be stored in my deployment history in Gearset, so I've got a full audit trail of everything that's been done. And these deployment history items are shared amongst your team. So if you have a number of developers working in the app, they can easily keep track of who's been pushing changes in different environments without having to leave Gearset. So that deployment has gone through. If I now jump into my repository and I go back to my branch and I look at the commits, you can see there's the add second field commit has just been added in there. And if I jump to my CI jobs in the Gearset and refresh that page, what you should see is the top job has now been kicked off. So you can see that CI job has automatically found this change that we've committed into this branch and is now pushing it out into my staging environment for automatic testing. And when that completes, you'll then get either a successful or a failure warning, and you'll be able to jump in to see exactly what that change was in the history of the app, along with other things like static code analysis, which will check your Apex for various rules which you can configure in the app. And again, you can grab copies of those deployment reports if you want more detail. So that hopefully gives you a quick overview of not only looking at the case study example of how one of our customers actually approaches the challenges, how they set up a Git-based flow, and how Gearset helped, but then also what that actually looks like in the app and how simple it is to really run those comparisons, track those changes, and then deploy them and set up a really complicated end-to-end flow if you want. So I'm just going to jump back to the slides, and I will hand back to Ellis.
So just to summarize really quickly, we've only shown you some of the ways that Gearset can help you with your release management. Obviously, you've seen that workflow between pushing changes into your source control and then triggering CI jobs. Obviously, there's a lot more that Gearset can offer you in terms of automation with the change monitoring and the unit testing, as well as things like deployment rollback. But hopefully you've seen how Gearset can help you implement a much more efficient and simple release pipeline. So with doing those fast and easy deployments and utilizing that automation, you'll be able to deliver really high quality features and much better services to your students faster and more successfully, which will help you foster those great relationships between the academic communities, helping you to drive that success. We're already used by dozens of universities and higher education institutes all over the world to help them supercharge their release management. So if you're also interested in trying us out or exploring the other features that you may not have seen today in more detail, just get in touch with us via our website and we can arrange a call with you to explore how Gearset can help your team personally. Or you can just start your free trial at the link on the screen, and this will give you 30 days complete access to all of our features, so you'll be able to test it out for yourself and see how it can work with your release management. We've got some resources here for you as well, in case you wanted to do a bit more reading. We've included the link to our page on why you should switch from change sets to Gearset. This just includes the top reasons and features of Gearset as to how much time you can save and how you can move from those manual change sets to a more automated system. Our white paper on version control for Salesforce will explain how to implement version control into your release management, and it's got lots of great diagrams for you as well, really helpful for explaining that workflow. We've also got some case studies as well. If you're interested in seeing how other companies are using Gearset to help their release management, we've got a bunch on the website that you can check out.
All right, so that is the end of the main part of the webinar. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what Gearset is and what you can do with it. We'll now move into if anyone has any questions. Now, I believe there is a little bit of a delay here on this live stream, so we'll leave this running for a little bit while we wait for those questions to come in. And while that's going on, I think it's worth saying that we've run through one example here in the webinar. Every business will be different, your challenges will be different. Well, if you have questions, then feel free to reach out to us and we can jump in more detail. And it's an important takeaway, I think, that Gearset is a really flexible tool. It's used by small teams of individual admins working in their orgs, all the way through to some of the largest companies in the world. And it provides a really flexible solution. So even if you think your system is unusual, if you think your team has difficult needs or the standard first-party tools aren't helping you, it is worth having a look at Gearset and getting in touch with us, because we generally can provide some quite significant time savings. If you want to do a bit of reading in your own time, then that white paper really is a good resource. It starts from first principles of what version control is and explains it in a lot more detail than I can go through in the webinar here, and then runs all the way through to what a process looks like in the end with some really practical examples of the types of metadata you might want to version control, how to set up the CI as we saw earlier, and a lot more as well beyond that. Right, we'll just wait for a little bit to see if those questions come in. Okay, well, it looks like we haven't got any questions so far. If you do have any other questions that you think of after the webinar, then feel free to reach out to us. You can get in touch at team@gearset.com, or you can go to our website and use our live chat. And if you want a more in-depth consultation, then just let us know and we can set that up. Well, I hope that was a useful overview in terms of what Gearset can do and how it can help higher education institutes supercharge their release management. Thank you very much for coming along today, and with this recording will be available on our YouTube channel before too long.